Hey everyone, welcome back to Untangled Vines, redefining the rules of work. So, as we like to do with this podcast, we try to give you insights, market trends, how to prepare for the future of work. And today we're going to continue on that path. And it's a continuation of a post that I did on LinkedIn about, are we asking the right questions about remote and hybrid work? And I'll dive into what I actually mean and what I meant with that post in this episode. So what you will be able to take away after this podcast episode is a few questions to rethink the way that you're thinking about remote work and hybrid work. And I think it's important because right now, whenever we talk about remote work and hybrid work versus in person and in the office, we're often talking about things like productivity. We're talking about engagement, employee experience, and we're talking about building culture. Now, obviously, with this podcast and the community that we have on LinkedIn and the product Grapevine that we're building, you should be able to know that I am a future of work pioneer and advocate. I believe in it. And when I say future of work, I mean remote and hybrid. And the big reasons for that is flexibility, inclusivity, and making work more fulfilling. Because if you are more satisfied with your life, or vice versa, if you're more satisfied with your job, then you experience better psychological well-being on both sides, right? And so that's a key importance to me. I am a workaholic and I love work and I love what I do. I love solving problems and so on and so forth. And so what I want to be able to do is deliver information, insights, and a platform to other people and other companies that helps them allow their employees to have a flexible, inclusive, and fulfilling work experience. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and dive into the post. So some of this I'm going to be reading directly from the post, and then I'll be breaking it down. Okay, so I say in the post, are we asking the right questions about remote and hybrid work? Lately, I've heard a lot of noise around remote and hybrid work. The things I've found is that the data being shown is dependent on where you stand in the debate. If you support in office, you can find data saying in office employees are more productive. If you are remote and or hybrid advocate, you can find data supporting your side of the argument. Now, let me break that down for a second, because I shouldn't say that, right? I shouldn't say that you can find the data that matches what you want depending on which side of the argument you're on, because we're selling a virtual office platform that helps hybrid and remote organizations stay connected and engaged. I shouldn't say that. But the reason that I did say this is to let you know how data actually works, right? So in my previous roles, I've been head of go-to-market, I've been director of sales operations and sales engineering, and then I've also been strategy staff executive. And in every single organization and position that I've worked in, I've done data analysis, I've done insights, I've turned the data into a story. And the thing with data is, if you only take a subset of the data that was examined, then you can manipulate it. And I think a lot of people do this in media, in positions of power, in the sense that, okay, we have an earnings call. I need the data to support that we're moving in the right direction. We might not be there yet, but we're moving in the right direction, right? Now, that's an ethical and moral conversation that we won't have today, but it is something to know. And so whenever I call out that, depending on your stance in this debate, in office, going back to 5 days a week, commuting all the time versus remote and or hybrid, you can find data that supports your argument, right? Now, that data from the study or the experiment or the observation through a meta-analysis, maybe it says what it says and it's true, but you don't take into account the variables. Now, let me put this in perspective. I know JP Morgan Chase had done an experiment or a study where they were looking at productivity before the pandemic and productivity during the pandemic. And what they found was that their analysts were more productive in the office. And there's a lot of variables that they didn't call out with that, right? One, we were going through a pandemic. So that's a variable. Two, we started to work 100% remote in this situation because they could work 100% remote, knowledge workers. And so, but they might have never worked remotely before, right? Or they thought it was only going to be for 2 weeks. So they sent people home. They did what they did. And then they never actually prepared a hybrid model or a remote model that their organization was going to operate under. And we'll get to that part a little bit later. But the point that I'm making here is that we know that Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, wants his employees back in the office. He's said it several times. He's said that remote workers aren't as productive. Don't quote me on this part, but if I remember correctly, he's said that remote workers are lazy, right? But this goes to the point of what I'm trying to talk about. And that goes into the next portion of the post. It says, when it comes to remote and hybrid, I think the questions need to change. We've worked in an office for so long that we've been able to identify specific ways to support employees. We never found a perfect solution, but we had structured approaches to an office, working from 9 to 5. Take 30 minutes to an hour lunch break rooms to break up the days, PTO policies, dress codes, office infrastructure and layouts, temperature settings, the timing of the day, the list goes on. And what I meant by this in the post, and I even say it, is meaning we have had the ability to test and adjust what works and what doesn't work in the office, the physical office, right? But since we see an increase in the trends of work that hybrid and remote are becoming more prevalent, we need to ask, is the data taking into consideration the approach that the hybrid or remote organization is taking? Is it that remote or hybrid work makes employees more or less productive? Or is it the lack of intention and structure that the company chooses or doesn't choose that contributes to better productivity, engagement, and inclusiveness? And the list goes on of benefits or not benefits, right? So that really is what I'm trying to have you think about in this episode. Is it that remote and hybrid organizations are less productive because they're in a remote setting or because they're in a hybrid setting? Or is it because that particular organization did not have a focus on setting up a strong foundation or infrastructure for that remote team or that hybrid team? And now I'm saying less productive, but I've also seen, again, this goes back to the first point, I've seen where remote workers are 20% more productive than 100% in-office workers, right? Now, the best case I've seen is that hybrid is the more productive teams. But let's go back to, are we asking the right questions? Because that's what I think it is. I think that these reports and statistics are answering the question that they're asking, but I don't know if it's the right question. So what I would like to see, and if there are any studies out there or articles out there, please send them my way. You can send it to me at info@grapevinesoftware.io, and I would love to see it. Or find me on LinkedIn, Zachary Wright, MBA. You should be able to find that. My tag is Pioneering the Future of Remote and Hybrid Work, CEO of Grapevine, your virtual office platform. So if you see this, please share it with me. But what I would like to see is the statistics on remote and or hybrid organizations who have a strong intentional approach to how they operate versus remote and hybrid organizations who just said that they were going to go remote and hybrid without having that full-on structure in place. Because I think those are two different organizations. The one that is structured and has policies for remote, they have policies for remote PTO specifically. They have policies or behaviors, or they reinforce these core values around remote and hybrid work. And then they actually have a structured approach to meetings, to one-on-ones, to employee growth plans, all these things that can be found in Grapevine. They have a structured approach, and they never let anybody go unheard. They never let somebody fall to the wayside to feel lonely. And they always keep the motivation going through different communication tools, through different updates, through different videos, through different messaging systems, all this kind of stuff, right? Skip level meetings, you name it. Versus the hybrid and remote organization that thought that we were going to be in the remote world for 2 weeks. They realized that that's not what's going to happen. It's going to be for 2 years or longer. And they've just been working that way, and they saw that their overhead went down. They saw that their employees were still able to get their work done, but they didn't necessarily focus on building a structured approach. So some of the questions that I mentioned in the post that I think you should ask yourself if you're a remote or hybrid organization is not, are we more productive in a remote organization, or are we more productive in a hybrid, or should we go back to the office? I mean, yes, ask those questions, but to really get to the root cause, ask yourself this for remote and hybrid organizations. Do we have the right infrastructure in place for our remote and hybrid employees? If the answer is no, come together with your team and ask, what do you all need to be more successful at your position, to be more successful in this company? What do we need to make this work, where we can still have flexibility, we can include everybody, and we can feel more fulfilled as a workforce? So that's one. Number two, have we been clear about what working remotely means to our employees? Now, this might be a leadership team question or an executive team question, definitely a CEO question. But have we been clear? What does remote work mean? Now, even though we're working from home, does that mean that we still have to sign on at 9 a.m. and work at least until 5? Or are we more flexible than that? If somebody works better from 10 to 7 p.m. with a 2-hour lunch break, is that okay? Or does it matter at all as long as the work gets done and they're showing up for meetings and they're providing value to the company? You need to have clarity. Those are just a few examples, but you need to have clarity about that. Another example, if it's work from anywhere or work from remote, right? If I go and travel to the mountains, to the beach, on vacation across seas, do I need to tell somebody? Or is it okay just to do this and they'll see me on the Zoom meeting or the Google Hangouts meeting or the Teams meeting? right? It's just setting these clear expectations for people on what is appropriate and what is not appropriate. And if you are still figuring this out as a company, be honest about that too, right? Just be honest and be clear. Okay. The third question you should start asking: have we defined the right processes and guidelines in place to make remote and hybrid work effective? This is important. It's a little bit different than the policies of being clear about what remote working is. It's more about, okay, we are a remote team or we're a hybrid team. And now we have these specific processes that include a remote option, a hybrid option, or whatever might come up. But do we have the right processes and guidelines in place? For example, and I know these are all like kind of falling on HR or the CEO in a sense. That's okay. But I think we can bring this into the leadership or the executive team, whatever the case is. But the right process, for example, okay, if we have several people in different time zones, what is the guideline for collaboration? Do we just ask the person if they're okay extending their hours into the US time versus India or Pakistan or London? Or do we have a process and a guideline to say, okay, if you need to contact someone out of your time zone, and it's not like East Coast, West Coast in the United States or Central Time, but it's more Pakistan or India, and they're 9 hours ahead or 6 hours ahead. Do you do an asynchronous video with collaborating tools involved, right? Set those processes in place. Same thing whenever it comes to, let's say, the sales organization. What is the process for reaching out to someone in a remote environment, right? Are you okay with wearing this type of shirt where it's like a short sleeve shirt, Nike with a hood on? Or do they have to wear ties and blazers or just a polo? Be very specific on your processes. Now I'm giving examples for like HR and stuff and that kind of stuff, but it goes deeper into operations on, okay, do we have a VPN that we need to use for security? Do we have to do double verification to sign in to our platforms? Do we only work on the computer and not our phone? These types of things is what I'm talking about. Okay. Number 4, the question that you want to start asking is, are we intentional with our actions and behaviors to support everyone in the organization through consistent communication, culture building activities, and providing growth opportunities to employees? Now, the reason that I asked this is because this is a big part of remote and hybrid work, right? These are some of the challenges that a lot of people talk about, which is the consistent communication. And sometimes it's not even consistent communication. It's how do we communicate? Where do we communicate for certain things? For example, I've worked in organizations who've used Slack, they use Zoom, I worked at an enterprise video solution called Kumu. We used our own platform for asynchronous videos and we shared that. So consistent communication is just, it all kind of goes back to intentionality and clarity, but consistent communication and clear communication is, okay, we're going to use Slack for simple and timely communication. We're going to use email for external communication with partners and clients and all that kind of stuff. We're going to use Grapevine for everything internal. Whether it's a company update, whether it's to show me and my dog working at the park instead of at home, like be very specific on that. Culture building activities. Make sure that even though you're a remote or a hybrid organization, you get the team together somehow, whether it's all virtually or you get everybody into separate or like for example, Kumu would have some people over in London. They would have some people over in the United States, on the East Coast, on the West Coast, and we would bring everybody together where we could, where it made sense if you're disparate like that. But if you're a smaller company and you have the funds to do it, go to one location and put everybody up in a hotel and do something for the first 4 hours of the day, and then the next 4 or 5 hours into the night, go to dinner, go to an activity where you can build your own pasta or make your own drinks or whatever the case is. Have that experience together outside of work so you get to know each other. If it's virtual, just bring everybody together. Make sure that you give them enough time where they can schedule around that and they can make it, right? And so that's culture building activities. You want to be intentional. Don't let this stuff fall to the wayside just because you're not in a physical office. Be intentional. With Grapevine, we have the spontaneous break room that you can go into. It pops open a notification saying Zach is in the break room. Would you like to join him? Yes, no. We have the community or the internal social network where you can post anything. You can post a question. You can post an update on your achievement. If you received a certification or your MBA or your degree or whatever, you can post something about your hobbies. Like you went hiking that weekend, or you went camping, or you went to the mountains. And I'm going to the mountains this weekend. That's why I got all those things on my mind. Those are culture building activities too, where you get to know the person beyond what I say, the squares, right? Beyond the squares, which is Zoom and Teams and Google Hangouts. And then this is very important. This last part is providing growth opportunities, because this often gets lost in translation or forgotten in a remote and hybrid model. Not so much as in a hybrid model, but definitely in a remote model, where because you don't see these people as often, unless you're on a cadence, which I highly recommend, and you have a platform like Grapevine where you can constantly see people and nobody's really forgotten. But this happens a lot where the growth opportunities will fall to the wayside because, let's say it's an introverted person that you have on the team call. They're not going to speak up as much. But we've also seen in a remote environment, they're more likely to type in the chat, engage with the reaction function in Zoom and all that kind of stuff. So find a way to make sure that you're focusing on your employees' growth. And that could be also from the trainings that you provide. What free trainings can you give to them? What trainings are they okay paying a couple of dollars and you reimbursing them? But then also the HR function and the CEO and the direct manager, maybe not the CEO, but the direct manager should have those conversations with their employees on how are they going to be able to make sure that this person is focused on growing in the organization, because that is a sign of retention and reduce attrition. Hopefully I said that right. But that's really what it is. Okay. So let me just circle back around. So the way that we think about remote and hybrid work, as far as data, we need to make sure that it's not manipulated to benefit that person's agenda. Right. And it's easily done, but just think about it in a variety of ways, where whenever you read this, don't just take the headline, actually dig into the article, see how they took that approach and see if it makes sense. The JP Morgan example, that was specific for JP Morgan Chase, right? That's not, in psychological terms and research, that's not generalizable. You don't have enough data to generalize it to all these other companies, right? So make sure that you know the background of the research and the person writing the research. We need to ask different questions. Not necessarily are remote or hybrid work or employees more productive or less productive, but do we have the right infrastructure? How can we be clear about remote working? Have we defined the right processes and guidelines? And are we intentional with our actions and behaviors to support everyone in the organization? I would love to know your thoughts. Find me on LinkedIn or follow us on Grapevine on LinkedIn, or join our community, our private LinkedIn community group called Untangled Vines, Redefining the Traditional Rules of Work. And let us know your comments, or drop a comment if you're watching this on YouTube. I'm going to continue to try to provide this type of information. I hope it's helpful. If it is, let me know. If it's not, let me know so we can make this most valuable to you. Let us know what you would like to hear next. And we do have some amazing guests coming up on the podcast, so stay tuned for that. We have the author of Courageous Cultures, Karen Hurt, coming in. So stay tuned for that. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next episode.